So, Steve, thank you for joining us. I know you're busy, and I promise that we're not going to take up too much of your time. So, how are you doing? How are you feeling?
Good, Shaun. It's great to be with you. It's been too long, obviously. We'll have a longer session catching up, but
without a doubt, we certainly will. We certainly
great.
will. So, I mean, Steve, listen, I'm not going. I can spend the next 20 minutes just listing your many accomplishments, which we're not going to do right there.
Go ahead. Yeah, go ahead.
We'll come back. I will come back and do that in Steve Garvey point two. But I wanted to talk to you about a little bit about, first of all, I remember. I want you to tell me the story about growing up, because now, tell us about your Irish heritage, or lineage, should I say?
Right. Well, the story, it starts in 1948. Parents were from Long Island and Brooklyn. Mom lived in Baldwin. Her dad had a great gas station on Route 27 out to the island. Dad's parents had a place in Glen Cove, another one in Rockville Center. Glen Cove was like 4 acres, and it was a getaway type of place. But Grandpa Joe was a Brooklyn policeman, and I had 2 other uncles that were New York detectives. So family obviously had deep roots in New York. But in the beginning of 1948, a fella came into my grandfather's gas station. He said, "Hey, Joe, I got this motel in Tampa I can't get to, and you're up to your elbows in grease every day. Come on, give yourself a break. I'll give you the motel, and I'll take the gas station off your hands, and let's do it." In those moments where we don't think very much, right? Grandfather took the grease rag and threw it at him, said, "Harry, you got it." Called up my grandmother and said, "May, we're going to Florida." She said, "On vacation?" "No, I just traded the gas station." She said, "You did what?" So they called my parents. 3 weeks later, they took a trip down to Florida and to throw out the anchor, so to speak. I always say something happened at a Horns or a Stuckey's on the way, and I was born in December of 1948 in Tampa. There was a reason why the motel was an easy giveaway for this fella. It was about 2 miles off the main road, 13 little cottages. It just was never going to work. But the family stayed. My dad became a transit bus driver. Mom worked for Continental Insurance. Grandpa became a welder. And then all of a sudden, the story really starts to get traction in 1956. Dad's a Greyhound bus driver. Comes home in late March of 56. This was after the Dodgers had finally beaten the Yankees in the World Series, 55. And we sit down, look, and he looks at me. He said, "Want to skip school tomorrow?" I said, "Yeah, wow, where are we going?" He said, "Well, I got a charter to pick up the Brooklyn Dodgers from the Tampa airport and take them to St. Pete to play the Yankees in an exhibition game. And I think it might be a fun day for you and I." Now, Dad was a diehard Brooklyn fan. Mom was a Yankee fan. She gloated a lot, but Dad finally had every reason to tell her, "I told you so," and tell her that it wasn't, wait till next year. Next year had come. So the next day, we take the bus. We drive to the tarmac of Tampa International Airport at 8 o'clock in the morning, and we're standing in front of the bus. And I had gotten out my Topps baseball cards. I have 8 Dodgers. And I said, "Is it okay, Dad, if I stand here?" He says, "Yeah." He said, "And take a look at your cards and when these players come by and see if you recognize them." Well, about 8:20, the K. O'Malley 1 landed, which was a DC-7 prop jet. The Dodgers had their own plane, only team in sports. And it taxied up, and there were no concourses. They pushed the ramp up to the plane. The door opened, and off came Walter Alston and Pee Wee Reese and Duke Snyder and Hodges and Ferrillo and Campanella, and of course, Jackie Robinson. So they all filed off, and they came by me as they went onto the bus, and I'd look at Dad and point to one of my cards. And finally, the last 2 guys were strolling along, and it was Campanella and Jackson. And all of a sudden, they stopped. I'm going, uh-oh. And Jackie Robinson looks at me and looks at my dad. Dad's got this Greyhound uniform with a name tag. He says, "Joe, does your son play baseball?" My dad said, "Yeah, we just started the 2nd Little League in Tampa, and he's going to start playing next Saturday." This was Tuesday. And he looks at me and he says, "Well, kid, if you practice hard and work hard, maybe you'll be a Dodger someday." And "Yes, sir." And I looked at my card. It's the Jackie Robinson. And then Roy Campanella looked at my dad and said those dreaded words, "How's he doing in school, Joe?" And my dad said, "Well, he's struggling with his reading a little bit." Well, before the they used to call kids that when I was growing up hyper, but I really had ADHD. I had trouble concentrating, auditory processing. So my dad said, well, he's having trouble reading. We're working with him every night. And then Roy looks at me and he says, son, you can work as hard as you want, but if you don't learn how to think and problem solve, he said, you'll never make it. And I said, yes, so I work hard. So they got on the bus. 45 minutes later, we pull up to Allang Field in St. Petersburg, and standing outside, the guys are getting their bags, and a little fella comes out in boxer shorts and a strapped t-shirt, little cigar, and he goes, looks at my dad and me, he says, kid, you want a bat boy today? And I looked at my dad and said, sure. Can I, Dad? He said, yeah. So he said, well, get the bats and balls and everything out there, and they're going to be out in 15 minutes for batting practice. So Dad helps me lug the bat bag and the helmets and so forth. And I get out there and I'm putting everything in place, and I hear tsh, tsh, and I look, and there's Mickey Mantle, which every kid loved, hitting these towering home runs into Tampa Bay. And I'm just staring at him in awe. And I hear, son, you want to play catch? I turn around, there's Gil Hodges, which was my dad's favorite, about the same size as Dad. And I said, yes, sir. Now, I just got my first Rawlings Heart of the Hide glove. It was about $9.95. That was expensive back then. And I took it off my belt, and he tossed me a ball with a little bit of arc. And I'm thinking, Mr. Hodges, I'm starting Little League. I can toss it back, a little more of an arc. And I hear, and I look, and boom, ball hits me in the chest. And Gil comes over, quite the family man. He said, you all right, son? I said, yes, sir. He said, you weren't watching Mickey hit that ball, were you? And I looked at him, and I said, yes, sir. And probably the first moment outside of my family, I got a true learning lesson. He looks at me, he says, son, I said, yes, sir. He said, we're the world champions. And I go, yes, sir. I won't look anymore. So at that moment, I realized when you're in the presence of the top of the mountain, you got to concentrate on that. So that day I sat next to Reese and Hodges talking about the Yankee pitcher and how he held a fastball and curveball. And Jackie almost sat on top of me when he wasn't looking, and he kind of sat down and he goes, oh, I'm sorry, son. And I'm thinking, that's okay, Mr. Robinson, show and tell on Monday, and I'm going to have a great time. And they won that day. It was to be Jackie's last spring. And it was right before, 2 years later, the transition to Los Angeles. But the traveling secretary loved my dad. So for 6 or 7 years after that, I bat boyed for the team. Then as I got into high school, of course, I was busy, but Dad still drove. And he actually drove until my last spring with the Dodgers in '82. So quite a history of growing up with my idols. 2 or 3 times every spring, I would bat boy for the Dodgers, but Dad would also get the Yankees in Detroit, maybe St. Louis. So to be around my idols and watch and listen to them talk was a great foundation for falling in love with the game, loving the history of it, knowing that you can't talk and listen at the same time. And lo and behold, 12 years after that first day of being a bat boy, I was drafted in the first round by the Dodgers.
Very cool. So just back up. So they flew from Vero to St. Pete?
Yeah, because they had their own plane. It would have been about a 3-hour drive, 2-lane.
Oh, I've driven it. It's not a fun drive, that's for sure.
Yeah, Alligator Alley,
Yeah.
And then they would stay 3 days because she had a chance to play the Reds or the Yankees, or go to St. Pete and play and so forth, or Tigers in Lakeland. So it was usually at least a 3-day, 4-game trip for them once a spring. So
did you ever get a chance to, you got a chance to be around them, but to, let those guys know 12 years later, I'm like, hey, do you remember the little guy that was your bat boy
Well, actually, Shaun, the clubhouse man, Nobi Kawano, had remembered me, and there was rumor that this was going to be potentially a great draft for the Dodgers, and arguably it was the greatest draft in history, because not only myself, but Tom Bashorek and Bill Buckner and Bobby Valentine, Davey Lopes and Ron Say. I think we had 9 guys on that draft that ended up playing over 8 years in the majors, which is phenomenal. So when you talk about great drafts in history, that usually comes up. And so that was 68. I get called up in 69. I had a breakout season as a rookie, and then got to Michigan, got from Michigan State after I took my last final in June, played about 80 to 90 games at Albuquerque, and I batted 370. So they bring me up in September of '69, and I fly in and I work my way down to the clubhouse, and there's Noby greeting me, and a few of the guys, this was early, 10:30 in the morning. So Noby says, go dress out. The guys want to take early batting practice with you kids. So I go to my locker, and there's number 6 in there. And, rarely do kids they bring up.
Digits, yeah.
But of course, I knew it was Furlow's number, and Ron Fairley wore it. And I thought, wow, this is cool. So I went out and took batting practice with Say and Lopes, Valentine, and was just hitting the ball out of the ballpark. And I was so excited. We were playing the Mets that day. So about the bottom of the 8th comes, we're down 3-0. And Alston looks at me, and I was always taught to stay close to the coach or skipper. And he said, you ready? And I said, yes, sir. So he says, get up there, hit for the pitcher. There's 2 outs. And I grab a bat, and I get up there and facing a lefty by the name of Jack Delore. And typical lefty, fastball away, slider in, change up. So I get in there, first pitch, little cutter inside. I turn on it, just missed the foul pole by about 10 feet. It would have probably gone 4-10. And I step out and I go, okay, he's going to throw me a tailing fastball away, which he did. And I go out and get it and just miss the foul pole and right. I'm thinking, wow, this isn't too tough, major league. So the next pitch, I see him wind up and the ball comes out of his hands. And all of a sudden, it just starts to drop. When I swing, it was outside, and the bat comes out of my hand and kind of hydroplanes over Wayne Garrett, the third baseman, and hits the outfield. And I miss it completely. And it was my first screwball I'd ever seen. So essentially 3 pitches and 2 almost home runs and a big K. And I just walk back to the dugout. I'm still stunned, really, my first at bat. And there's Alston. He said, well, kid, quite auspicious. You broke a record for keeping a bat fair at Dodger Stadium. And he said, but you took some great cuts. He says, you'll probably get a couple thousand hits and have a pretty good career. And I looked at him and said, thank you, sir. And ended up with 2,600 and a very blessed career. And, from the history of that first Bat Boy day till today, it's been almost a divine charm for me to be part of the game and an ambassador for it.
And that's something you've done very well. When you talk about the Dodgers, obviously we talk about Tommy Lasorda, we talk about another good Irishman, Vin Scully, but the name that always comes up is, Steve Garvey. So I was looking at, I would look through, I knew most of your records, but, and then I started to look at them when you think about, to have a season without an error at first base, that's an unbelievable accomplishment. I was looking, I think now, granted, it's not fair and we're not going to talk about the players today and how much harder it is and yada, yada, yada. But I think Miguel Sano has 19 errors at first, but then again, he is built like an offensive lineman. And I didn't ask you if you knew what the launch angles were on those 2 foul balls that you hit. 2 questions for you. One is from me and one is from one of our panelists. So sure. my question for you is, when was the first time you realized what it meant to be Irish, and what does it mean to be Irish to you?
Well, Shaun, with deep roots, especially from my father's side and somewhat from my mother's side, I'd always had this sense, because every year around Thanksgiving would go up to the island and Grandpa would take me to Ebbets Field and people, he was a street policeman, everybody loved him, and the Irish community, there's Joe Garvey, Joseph Patrick Garvey. And I always had a sense of history, knowing that our family had come from
We're losing again?
As we're doing now, the tracing of my family history, they stayed there in building the Panama Canal and sent my father to New York to live with relatives Unfortunately, they passed away. And then with the emergence of the family's roots being in New York and having a sense of history as an Irishman. And then when I first went to Ireland and stepped on the old sod, so to speak, and started to, we did some specials there with a series we had called International Sportsman. But to be there and to learn more about Ireland and to understand that what an honor it is to be an Irish American. And then, of course, things through the years, I think I was the head of several St. Patrick's parades, which is the ultimate. And then, of course, to the Irish American Hall of Fame truly has been very, very special to me and my family. So it's been an evolution of being an Irish American, and I'm very proud of it.
Very much so. Just before we get to the last question, how did your mother, as a Yankee fan, feel about you signing with the Dodgers?
Well, she, of course, was there every step of the way from being a bat boy and so forth. But she negotiated. We were stuck. I knew that the first round draft price got about $25,000 back then. And my dad was a great Greyhound bus driver, but didn't have to do much negotiating. So we had gotten Guy Wellman, the great Dodgers scout, up to 25. And we were about ready to say, we'll take it. My dad and I in the living room, Mom was doing the dishes, when she peeked her head around the corner and said, Guy, and Guy said, yeah, Billy. She said, I'll pay Stevie 25 to stay back at Michigan State. It's not enough. So Dad looks at me, I look at Dad, oh no, she's blown it. Now Guy Wellman realizes he's negotiating with the wrong people. He goes into the kitchen, and we hear, now Millie. And Mom says he came in, started drying the dishes. So about 10 minutes later, they come out arm in arm around the corner, and Guy says, well, boys, we got a deal. And I look at Dad, he looks at me, and we're sweating. What is this? And he says, yeah, your mom's convinced me you're worth $40,000, a new car, and the rest of your education. So I tell this story frequently when I lecture to the ladies in the audience. I had a good agent, Jerry Capstein, but I think Billy Garvey could have got me a little more eventually. So it's quite a story. Mom took over, and us guys, suddenly got relegated to, getting stuck on the couch.
That's pretty awesome. Hey, listen, the power of the Irish mother.
That's right.
As I said, don't screw with the Irish mother. So listen, we appreciate you doing this. Before we go, one of our panelists who has stuck with us through all of our technical difficulties, Dave asked, it's kind of like a two-part question, but who was your favorite hitting instructor during your career?
Oh, that's interesting. Back then, some teams had them, some teams different, but we had Dixie Walker, who was the great old Dodger outfielder, hit for great averages. And he worked with me, and I pretty well was a left center to right center kind of hitter. But he worked with me constantly on, and I had basically a closed hand, staying closed, thinking, think right center, cover the outside part of the plate. And then on inside pitches, he said, your hands are so quick, you can just use your hands and get on that inside pitch. And we worked hours and hours on it, worked on bunting, worked on hitting and running so that I could be a complete hitter. But I give him a lot of credit for really turning me into a complete hitter. And like you said before, situational hitter. I mean, I would get 10 or 12 bunt hits a year, which in 500 at bats, it's 25 more points to the average. I'd get 6 or 8 hit and run hits, throw that in there. So just by able to do 2 things like that, you could hit 30 or 40 points higher. Yeah. And by, like you said before, sacrifice flies, the teamwork concept of that is valuable to everybody. So Dixie really made the difference in my hitting.
He had a second kind of a follow-up. It's like why coaches have gotten away, why teams have gotten away from coaches like Charlie Lau and Walsh. Yeah. Not even going. But I think, and why like Rudy Jaramillo and Clint Hurdle aren't around. But I think I can answer that. It's just they don't buy into the analytics, and it's just these propeller heads with their clipboards and their launch angles, and the game has changed. We're not going to go down the route. We're going to keep this light and fluffy and like the cream on top of an Irish coffee. But I appreciate you taking time in the middle of all your construction and in the middle of my moving to be with us. we are definitely, we're going to have the retrospective where I'm just going to sit here and list off all of the many accomplishments in your career. You know, I mean, I've said it every time I've seen you. I'm going to say it every time till it happens. You know, there's 3 people that I'm very lucky to have gotten to spend quality time with, who I can't wait till they have their plaques in Cooperstown. That's yourself, Jim Cott, and well, I mean, Gil Hodges. I didn't know Gil Hodges, but I got a chance to know you, the wonderful Tommy John and Jim Cott. And you know, like I said, the Hall of Fame will not be full till you're there, and we long for that date. I know we got a little bit of time until that committee comes around, but one of these times they've got to come to their senses, you know.
And there'll be a special seat for you, Shaun.
Hopefully before that, Steve, we'll get to break bread and we'll get to sit. And like I said, I look forward to the day when John Fitzgerald says, hey, I got to call Steve Garvey and find out what uniform size he is so that he has the right uniform, you know, and that, you know, that dirty big number 6 and Garvey across the back, and the tricolor on the front. Steve, give my regards to the family. We will be in touch. Thank you for doing this. Thank you to people who braved our technical difficulties, and we will see you again soon for Cracking the Bat.
Great. And Shaun, you never change. You don't need hair and makeup. Right? God bless. Thank you.
I'm waiting on A-Rod's guy. Take care.
Everybody watching. Thank you.